All right, welcome back to the show. This is Wooden Sticks. I am Kevin Gorg, your host. We are, of course, recording from the Aquarius Home Services studio. Really excited today to be joined by one of my dear friends with the Wild organization and a great friend of the game of hockey. He is Mike Snee. Right now, the VP of the Minnesota Wild Foundation and Community Relations. He is heading up a brand new Skate It Forward initiative that's going to really have an impact on grassroots hockey in the state. And I encourage you, if you can, to get involved. But most importantly, some really great conversations around the game of hockey today. And certainly we're going to talk about the state tournament, which starts this week. We're going to talk about a much-needed win over the weekend for the Minnesota Wild. They beat the Boston Bruins 1-0. Big shutout from the Gus Bus, who was awesome in that hockey game. And Bill Guerin sensing some trouble. And I was on that last road trip that did not go well in Utah and in Colorado. I love that this guy believes in this group and is up against the cap and is able to be creative and aggressive to let the team know that we still have something to do this year. We're not waiting for cap hell to go away and for some of these younger players to develop. We're going to make a run now, and going and getting Gustav Nyquist from Nashville and making some shrewd moves around that. Certainly a talker and part of the conversation as well. So a lot to get to today. And, you know, that Wild win and Nyquist looking great on that top line was something that was very encouraging. We're recording on a Monday morning because I'm hopping on an airplane this afternoon with the team. I'm going to head to Seattle. Big game against the Kraken on Tuesday. We've got Lou Nanne on the trip, our very first guest, the original guest on Wooden Sticks and the godfather of hockey here in the state of Minnesota. But important road trip for the Wild. You know, the Kraken are probably not going to be a playoff team, but Vancouver absolutely is in the playoff conversation. And if Minnesota wants to put themselves back in a good position of comfort, they kind of lost that. But the win against Boston and some help they got with the out-of-town scoreboard over the weekend would allow them to maybe go out and win these two games on this road trip and get back to that double-digit point lead, so we're not sweating it out into the final week and change of the season in April. So let's see how that plays out. But certainly a huge win against Boston over the weekend, and very encouraging to see Bill Guerin go out and get Nyquist, who I believe is a super versatile player. He'll help on the penalty kill. He'll be great on the power play. He can play center. He can play wing. Super well-liked guy in that locker room. Of course, he's a Swede. And really a move that I'm very, very excited about, knowing that Ek and Kaprizov are likely going to be out till April, and now Jonas Brodin is out. They're saying week to week. So this team continues to try to flourish with all these injuries. It's been the story of the season. It's not just the games lost, but the magnitude of the players they're losing. These are big-time players. And so right now they're in a very good spot, but they've got some really tough games coming up, and this road trip could really put them in a good position before they come home to take on the Pittsburgh Penguins. So that's a quick Wild update. Pat Micheletti last week, our guest on the show, we talked about some potential state tournament matchups, and great to see his alma mater Hibbing get in the tournament. They are going to be, I think, a really tough team to beat as the 1 seed. They've got a matchup with Laverne on Wednesday night. They'll be heavily favored in that contest. I got a chance to watch Hibbing ice level on Hockey Day in Minnesota, and they went toe-to-toe with a really good Eden Prairie team that I thought was good enough if they got the breaks to make a run at the Double-A tournament. So Hibbing, the team to beat in Class A, that's a matchup to watch on Wednesday. So is the 4-5 matchup with East Grand Forks and Northern Lakes. Now, Northern Lakes has Mike Randolph, who's got over 700 wins as a bench boss, state tournament cred going back to his days with Duluth East. And East Grand Forks was one of the preseason favorites. They were like 1 or 2 in the rankings before the season started, and they did not have the season they wanted. Certainly injuries and illness and scheduling quirks. They played a very hard schedule, led to them being a 500 hockey team, but they validated, I think, some of those preseason rankings by beating the number 1 team in the state at that time, Warroad, in that section final. So that'll be an intriguing matchup as well. St. Cloud Cathedral, the defending champs, are back. They'll take on a perennial power every year in Class A is Matamidi. A down year this year for Jeff Pogel's squad, and there's certainly some stories behind that. Players that defected to play junior hockey at the very end of summer put that team in a position where they had to play a lot of really young players, but you never want to sleep on the Zephyrs. They come with a physical brand of hockey. They're tournament tested, and Jeff's a great coach. So that should be a fun matchup. And of course, a recent guest on our show, Mike Luckraft, the head coach of the Northfield Raiders. They get there. They have 22 regular season wins. They're going to match up with Orono, and that is a very difficult matchup for the 3-seeded Raiders. They beat Orono during the regular season. They had to come from 2 goals down to do it. It was a 4-2 hockey game. They scored that 4th goal very late to make it a 2-goal cushion. I would expect another 1-goal game, and maybe the best game on Wednesday as far as the matchups go would be Northfield and Orono. On the AA side, just spectacular section finals. I mean, I had so much FOMO on Friday. We were in Colorado, and I was watching the Wild get beat by their rivals, the Avalanche, and keeping track of all these games back in the state of hockey. Specifically that night, the 2 section final games, St. Thomas Academy and Cretin-Durham Hall, they're huge rivals. They both have state tournament dreams. They're both good enough to make a run at that AA title, and they go double overtime at Braemar. Cretin tied it up in the closing seconds, but St. Thomas gets the double overtime win. And then maybe the classic games of all the section finals, Aldrich Arena, packed to the gills, Hill Murray, Stillwater, back and forth game. Hill Murray rallies from a couple of goals down. They get to double overtime, and Stillwater wins the game. Just fantastic drama. And looking at the matchups this week, you've got that Stillwater team in against an Andover team that started the year 0-9 and made it to the state tournament. An incredible Cinderella story. St. Thomas matches up with Shakopee. I'm a huge fan of the Shakopee Sabres. That's going to be a really, really good hockey game with the 3 and 6 seed, and Calvin Simon, head coach, that's done a wonderful job with that Shakopee program. I think the potential for a blowout would be the evening game that starts the procession with the number 1 rated Moorhead Spuds going up against Lakeville South. You know, Moorhead has been a team that's been to many, many state tournaments. They've been to state championships, haven't got quite over the hump, but this might be their year. They've got a really, really good hockey team. They're the 1 seed. Lakeville South, who I think had the softest section to get through, will be tested for class there. They're playing some of their best hockey. They're going to need their goaltender to be huge in that game. And then the 4-5 matchup to close that Thursday schedule on the state tournament side, the 4-seed Rogers against the 5-seed Edina. On paper, Rogers should be favored. They've been one of the top-ranked teams in AA hockey all year. They've got a ton of firepower. They score goals in bunches. But I'll tell you this, it's their first trip to the state tournament. And here comes Kurt Giles and Edina, tournament tested. Giles has multiple state championships, 3, I think, in the last decade, maybe the last 11 years. Do not ever look past Edina and Kurt Giles. That should be a spectacular hockey game. And just a big week. If you're a fan of the game, which clearly if you're here on Wooden Sticks, you're probably loving hockey. And this is a week where we all get paid between the Wild, college hockey now getting to their tournament time. And what a great time to connect with Mike Snee here today on the show. He was originally one of the first members of the organization going back to before the rink was built. So he was on that team that helped get this thing off and running, and what a run it was in those early years for the Minnesota Wild. Went back to do some work in college hockey for a little over a decade, and now he's back with this Skated Forward initiative. We're going to have a wonderful conversation with Mike Snee, go back to his roots in Duluth where he grew up, and really dive deep into what Skated Forward is all about. And that's coming up today, the main portion on our podcast. I want to thank the people that support this show, our partners, starting with John Schweitz and all of our friends with the Minnesota Masonic Charities. They've got the Cancer Center, the Children's Hospital, and the Masonic Home in Bloomington. They are the largest fraternal organization in the world. And they consistently, guys, they answer the call in terms of charitable needs right here in our community. Thank you, John Schweitz. Thank you to Minnesota Masonic Charities. They do wonderful work. And of course, if you're in Minnesota, you got to be into the outdoors. And why not find your best hook? And that is Onyx Fish and Onyx Maps. They are best in class and wonderful partners here of our show.
We've told you about OnX Hunt. Now let me tell you about OnX Fish. Ice fishing is here, and it's time to hit the frozen water with OnX Fish. The Fish app is the most comprehensive fishing tool for increasing your confidence on ice. Use OnX Fish to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potentials. OnX Fish also shows you hot spots, lake-by-lake regulations, and private and public land ownership information. For a limited time, download OnX Fish for free in Minnesota and Wisconsin, or go to onxmaps.com/fish to get more information on the app that is changing the game on ice.
And our newest partner, of course, our friends over at Insight Brewing. What a tap room they have. Hey, thank you to our new partner, Insight Brewing. They are located over in Northeast Minneapolis. The Insight Tap Room features 25 tap lines of rotating beers, THC seltzers, non-alcoholic beverages, local food trucks, and so much more. Insight has a 120-inch projection screen, and they will be showing all of the Minnesota Wild games throughout the season. You can also join Wooden Sticks at Insight Brewing at the tap room once a month for live shows featuring special guests, watch parties, hot takes, and of course, cold beer. You want to guarantee your seat? I got good news there too. Visit insightbrewing.com to request a free reservation. For a full list of other events, the food truck schedule, new beer releases, and more, follow at Insight Brewing on your favorite social media platforms and stay up to date. Thank you again, my friends over at Insight Brewing. Welcome back to Wooden Sticks. As promised, very special guest today. Longtime member of the team with the Minnesota Wild, couple of different ventures there. We're going to get into some of those details. He is Mike Snee. And Mike, what a huge week for all of us around the Minnesota Wild and, of course, in downtown St. Paul with the return of the boys high school hockey tournament.
Yeah, I think it's the best week of the year with the Let's Play Hockey Expo also going on, and just seeing so many people walking around in their community hockey jackets, hooded sweatshirts, hats, and just celebrating the game. And I feel like I say this every year, but I think this year's boys tournament's as attractive a field as we had in a long time. So the Monday of the best week of the year, in my opinion.
You know, it's funny. It's still got the juice. You know, I'm pushing 60 years old, and I've been going to the tournament since I was probably, 6 or 7 years old. And when this week hits, and you just mentioned it, we're recording this on a Monday, the week is upon us, there is still a buzz in the air. There's still an excitement and anticipation. I can't explain it because the tournament looks different now than it did when I was growing up, but it still has all the juice, and it makes me so happy.
Yeah, I agree. It's different. And better might not be the right word, but it's just as compelling. It's just as impactful, if not more impactful. Having girls playing hockey in the girls tournament that occurred a couple years ago just adds to it. Now you have a 2.5 week period here as opposed to just a 1 weekend period where hockey takes over St. Paul. And I think there's other aspects that have gone on in youth sports and stuff that make you appreciate what this is and that it's still occurring. And it's a great week. And as I grow older, I appreciate it more every year.
So for our listeners, take us back to where your passion for hockey started to back when you were a kid. What was your journey like?
Well, what really moved me was back when I was a young kid, I watched the Burnsville Braves in the state tournament. And prior to that tournament, I didn't really like the position of goalie, but I'm pulling your leg a little bit, Gorg.
Of course.
I'm your age, so I grew up in Duluth and didn't play organized hockey as a kid, but I played hockey all the time in the winter. Back not to go down the old man route here, but we were outside as much as possible, and we were at the outdoor rink all the time, playing hockey, pickup hockey, and just having fun. And then we kind of bookend that in the fall and early spring with tons and tons of street hockey. I can't tell you how much street hockey we played as a kid. And my childhood was, I think, one of the golden eras of hockey here in Minnesota with that early 80s North Stars team was so exciting. growing up in Duluth, the UMD Bulldog men's team at that time was just tremendous, and 7 goals a game it seemed like, and then that was the state tournament occurring, and then of course on the heels of the Miracle on Ice, which they won the gold medal on my 11th birthday, so that was pretty impactful. So my love for hockey didn't necessarily occur because I played at a high level or even played organized hockey, but the amount of hockey that was going on in my life growing up in Duluth was a lot.
And you mentioned Duluth, and I think right away of the Bulldogs, Mike Snee, the deck. That is one of those unique buildings that when I first got to go to a game at the deck and watch the Bulldogs play, I was probably, I want to say junior high, and up there for a hockey tournament. And I got to tell you, that place, you talk about a magical building. That was it.
Oh yeah. I think it was about 182 feet long. I mean, it had no neutral zone basically. So you just went from one scoring opportunity to the next. And when I was really young, it was Kurt Giles and Mark Pavlich and John Harrington and Dan Lempe and guys like that. And then when I got into junior high school and high school, it was the Brett Hall, Tom Curvers, Norm McIver, Matt Christensen, Bob Loxo. I mean, just all these unbelievable names. And they had great series with the Gophers and the 5 overtime loss to Bowling Green in the national championship game. So Bulldog hockey was magical back then, and then they had a dry run, but they came back and they had a really nice decade there, and best program in the country, you could argue, for a while.
So for all of us here in Minnesota, I love that you mentioned those North Star days, and I remember that first trip to the Stanley Cup when they met the Islanders, and that was a really tough matchup right in the middle of their dynasty. But we had our hearts kind of ripped out of our chests by Norm Green and that whole debacle when the team moved to Dallas back in the early 90s. And I was at the final game at the Met Center. And I remember when the Met Center was torn down later the next, I don't know, year or two, they covered it on local news. And I was a FIAD teacher at St. Peter's Grade School in North St. Paul, and we watched it. And the kids teased me because I started crying. I got choked up. So my point of all of this conversation is it was a really, really big deal when Minnesota got a team back, and you were a part of the core, the group that first became the team that started the Minnesota Wild, and you were a part of that year or two leading up to it, the rink being built. How did that all come together for you? How did you land that job?
Oh, good fortune. I got to say, I have to express a lot of gratitude for so many things in my life, and that's definitely one of them. My first job out of college was an internship with the North Stars, the 91-92 season. So the season before they left, the first season they wore the ugly uniforms is probably what people know it as. So I got that internship and just got to meet a lot of people. I was lucky at that young of an age to be able to, I reported to Tom Vanelli, and he knows everybody, and he introduces you to everybody. So that was so critical to my beginnings, being 22, 23 years old and having that. I took a 2-year detour and went to work for the Timberwolves. A lot of fun. Guy named Jeff Municky there, who should be the governor of the state, one of the best.
Salt of the earth.
Yeah, one of the best humans you'll ever come across. But so I had 2 good years with the Timberwolves and being able to get to know Jeff Municky and many other great people there. And then went to the Minnesota Moose. So you talked about when the Met Center was torn down. I vividly recall I was working for the Moose at the time, and we gathered in our little conference room and watched it. And if you remember, it didn't all come down. It didn't.
Right.
It wasn't an A+ job by whatever dynamite company they hired, because part of it stayed standing, which felt like that was appropriate, really. And then all of a sudden, the Moose left, and St. Paul, Norm Coleman, a few people wanted to bring the NHL back here, and I was fortunate to know some of the people that were involved, and was hired 2.5 years before they started play in the summer of '98. And we had a small group, and it really was like this small little business, but we were starting an NHL team. And I think I knew how special it was going through it back then, but now that I look back on it 27 years later, I realize how special it was and how meaningful it was, and ended up spending a decade with the team. left to work in some other hockey jobs, but then came back this summer, and it's just really meaningful to still see the how successful the team is, the following by the fans. And Gorgie, the North Stars had a few years there where fans kind of checked out on the team.
Yep.
That just has not happened with the Wild. And then now in my new role, seeing the impact the Wild have on hockey in our state from a participation level, from a meaningfulness level. When you and I were growing up, it was Minnesota versus Massachusetts, and Massachusetts frequently was getting the best of Minnesota. And now, for a variety of reasons, one of the biggest ones being the existence of the Wild and how the Wild conduct themselves in the state when it comes to growing the sport and shining a light on all aspects of the sport. Minnesota has really risen to the top with no peer when it comes to whether it's producing high-end hockey players, just getting everybody to play the sport, or just how meaningful all levels of the game is in the culture of the state. And I really credit the Wild a lot for that, for where hockey is today in Minnesota. So I guess that's my little path in a nutshell.
I love it. And I think, there was a moment during the nationally televised game over the weekend when the Wild were able to beat the Boston Bruins 1-0, where they spent 3 or 4 minutes within that broadcast speaking to what you just talked about, the impact that the Wild have had on the community. And then the state tournament being this week, they were talking about how when people haven't been to Minnesota and come during this week and see it for the first time, how blown away they are that every night you've got a full house. You've got 19,000 fans in there to watch high school hockey. It is an incredible event. And I think because we've been around it all our lives, we sometimes take it for granted. But then when we hear a national broadcast like we did over the weekend, and then I always might go back to when we have different Wild players that are on the team for the first time, and they usually are traveling for part of the tournament, but they always seem to come home that weekend of the championship games. And then some of those players get to attend and take it in, and how blown away they are by a high school tournament with that type of attendance. It all ties together, and I think it's fitting that the Minnesota Wild are the hosts for these tournaments as well.
Oh, for sure. And you're talking about how these little things just make you realize how special it is we have it. And long ago, I was in the press dining here at the Xcel Energy Center. This was back on my first stint. And I happened to be in line behind somebody I didn't know who it was to get my food, but then he started talking, and right away it brought me back to the state tournaments in the mid 80s, and it was Chris Cuthbert.
Oh.
And he was in town to broadcast. I think it was a Canadian. It was a game that was going to be on nationally in Canada, and he's a national broadcaster in Canada at the time. I think still might be, but he was at the time.
Yes.
And you know what it's like. I heard that voice, and it just suddenly I'm watching like Hibbing Bemidji double overtime on a Thursday night in 1983. And so I just happened to mention, hey, I heard your voice, and I'm suddenly transported back. Well, then we ended up sitting together. And it was like 45 minutes of him just saying how broadcasting that state tournament was one of the highlights of his broadcasting career. And he was rattling off names just like I can rattle off names. Reggie Miracle, and
Yes.
And it was just one of those, I didn't expect it, but one of those moments where he just clearly had so much affinity for the state high school hockey tournament. And this was 25 years later, and he's not even a Minnesotan. So there are moments like that all the time, and they seem to be more and more frequent, that make you realize how special of a week this is. But really what it is, it's the whole thing. It's the whole high school hockey for all the girls and boys, and the community hockey that feeds it, and all the games that go on throughout the state all winter long in these beautiful community ice arenas. And then it just culminates at the state tournament. So the state tournament is what we think of, but it's really the whole 4 or 5 month experience statewide.
So we'll get into the Wild and maybe some playoff hopes and Stanley Cup dreams in the next couple of seasons, because I really believe right now that this team and this organization has put together a group that I believe is going to do something really special in the next couple of years. I'm really, really excited about the direction right now of the hockey team. But I want to talk about Skate It Forward because, you and I have connected throughout the year, and I've heard really good things. And, part of the reason I wanted to have you on week of the state tournament, because I think this does tie back into continuing to try to grow the game of hockey here. Right now it's at a high level, but there's another whole level it can get to. So for fans out there that maybe have not heard of Skate It Forward, take us through how this whole thing came together.
Yeah, and first I want to credit a lot of people here, certainly ownership, Craig Leopold for getting behind this. But one name I haven't mentioned yet is Matt Makeham. And
Yep.
Matt's been here since when I started way back in 1998. He was already on board. And there were multiple people involved, but Matt was the leader of having the vision of really embracing hockey in the state, which ultimately led to the phrase, the state of hockey. And so the Wild have been so supportive of all things community hockey in Minnesota since day one. And along my way here, staying involved in hockey my whole career, Matt and I stayed close, and Matt grew up in it. Matt had kids that played community and high school hockey and beyond. So he really knows what it's like, not just from where he sits here as the CEO of the Wild, but also as a person who played it as a child and then as a parent of it. So he clearly understands how special it is, how successful it is. But like I think you alluded to, that there's still another level that we can take it to. And I'm just appreciate that he sees the long-term aspect of what Skated Forward is. And what Skated Forward is, it's an addition to our foundation. The Minnesota Wild have had a foundation since 2008. It's one of the top performing foundations in Minnesota, led by Rachel Schultz. We raise a lot of money through a variety of events, through auctions. If you come to a game and you participate in the Split the Pot raffle. So we raise money that way and then reinvest it back into the state. About half of it will go into various youth hockey initiatives, and about half of it will go into wonderful children's health causes from the Children's Hospital and a few other organizations that are working to improve the health and welfare of kids in Minnesota. But we thought, we can add another aspect to our foundation, and in essence, take community hockey, which is the phrase that we're using, and make that a cause. So now we can go out and raise money without having to have an event, without having to have an auction or an opportunity to win half of a jackpot, and reinvest it back into community hockey. And I'm giving you a long answer here, so you can, if you need to run to the bathroom, go ahead. I'll be talking for a while. Community hockey is really, loosely defined as the youth hockey associations that are plentiful throughout the state, about 130 of them, the varsity high school hockey programs for girls and boys throughout the state. And then most importantly, or I should say as importantly, but probably underappreciated, is how we pay for our arenas in this state. We fund our arenas publicly. It might be by a community, it might be by a county, it might be by a school, different mechanisms of how we do it. But the objective is that they're not businesses. They're meant to serve the communities. Those three things make up community hockey. And we realize how critical it is, but there is no oversight for that. There's no CEO of community hockey. There's not a headquarters for community hockey. There are three separate entities that work so well together, but there needs to be some kind of like tying them together to make sure that we don't take it for granted and that we don't lose that. So Skate It Forward is, in essence, part of the Minnesota Wild Foundation, meant to preserve, strengthen, and celebrate community hockey. And the number one thing that we just need to make sure that we do and that we don't, fall asleep at the wheel is that we always have more kids tomorrow playing hockey than there are today. So our primary objective at Skate It Forward is to do what we can to make sure that tomorrow there's more 5-year-olds starting hockey than there are today. And in 2 days, there's more kids starting hockey than there are tomorrow. And just make sure that we can do what we can to ensure that happens. And as wonderful as hockey is in the state right now, there are still some things that we need to pay attention to and not bury our head in the sand. You probably have seen some of the attention that both Bloomington Kennedy and the situation within the St. Paul Public Schools and some very legacy, tradition-rich schools that have had a lot of success. My senior year, Bloomington Kennedy was the state champions, and they just played their last game a week and a half ago, and tonight they have their final banquet. And after that banquet ends tonight, Bloomington Kennedy hockey is no more. So there are opportunities for us to take something that is working so well and is so wonderful and is such an important part of our state and make it even better. And we want to do what we can to help all of the wonderful people around the state that are making it what it is.
And I know it from a personal level because Burnsville, also a team that's got a great tradition. Tom Osiki, one of the legendary coaches in the history of high school hockey in the state, now cannot field their own team. They are combined with their arch rivals just across the border there in Burnsville, with Apple Valley and the Kennedy situation. We've seen Richfield over the last decade see their numbers go down, and so I'm all on board because you have different population cycles in these communities, and they go up and they go down, and when programs get shut down like the Kennedy one, it hits home. I grew up in the 80s, back when Kennedy was a power. You just talked about them winning state tournaments, being in state tournaments, developing great players. I look at Jefferson, a powerhouse forever. Their program's on the wrong side of it right now. So if we can get skated forward and build something here and encourage and fund and get more people involved in the game of hockey, everybody wins. Like, everybody wins. So it's such a positive idea and experience. And with the Minnesota Wild Foundation, every year I'm lucky enough to be a part of that as a co-host with Audra Martin. They have that big gala that raises all that money. And I got to tell you, Mike, I'm blown away every year sitting in that building there at the XL and watching people come together for a great cause. So there's a lot of momentum here that can build this thing up. How do you feel like the Skate It Forward can maybe make its first real strides to get people aware of it? I hope that this podcast can be a part of that step, but how do we get the word out?
Well, what we want to do, to boil it down to simplicity, we want to eventually, someday, and acknowledge right now this is ambitious, but someday we want to pay for every kid in Minnesota to play their first year of hockey for free. All right.
Wow.
When you look at the research in hockey, our issue is not keeping kids playing once they're playing. We have one of the highest retention rates in youth sports. Our biggest challenge is to simply get a kid to play hockey. And you probably see this or experience it. If a parent didn't play hockey, so let's say a young girl or boy, their mom or dad didn't, neither of them played hockey, that's intimidating to some families when the facility they play in isn't necessarily in the kids' elementary school like a basketball gymnasium is. There's equipment required. It's not running based. There might be some perceptions where there's a little bit of truth to the perceptions, but also some inaccuracies to the perceptions of what being a hockey player is like. So we have to be much more deliberate in asking kids to come out and give our sport a try, and asking parents of kids to have their kid come out and give the sport a try. So if we can just eliminate or reduce one more barrier, or just get a few more kids in every community playing hockey every year, that'll be meaningful. So that's our goal. And it is every kid, every Minnesota kid, doesn't matter, girl, boy, metro, non-metro, you can afford it, you can't afford it, whatever it is. It's inspired by the Pay It Forward movement. And then the notion is that it's also philanthropic. And that's my job. That's our job here at the Wild, is to raise money off of this to reinvest back in hockey. Very similar to if you're just feeling generous one day and you buy the person behind you a cup of coffee and it's unexpected to them, and maybe they could have afforded it with no problem at all, but they're so moved by your generosity that they buy the next 10 people coffee because they're feeling it. That's what we want to uncover here in Minnesota. And our initial research indicates to us that the hockey community of Minnesota really wants the greater hockey community to thrive. Okay. Because community hockey only works if it's doing really well in Delano, but it's struggling in the surrounding communities, then it's not going to work well in Delano. Delano needs hockey to work in all of the neighboring communities. Grand Rapids needs hockey to work in the neighboring communities. Edina needs hockey to work in the neighboring communities. So we feel, and I'm very confident that there is this statewide belief that hockey is something that should be available to all Minnesota kids. It's part of the fabric of living in Minnesota, and that we want to ensure that we don't take it for granted. And that's why we say preserve it, but strengthen it, and then celebrate the heck out of it. We're already doing all of that. We just want to do more of it. So to answer your question, we're going to work with probably 7 or 8, maybe 9 associations this year, hockey communities this year, meaning the upcoming 2025-26 season. We will pay for all of their kids that are playing hockey for the first time. And when we say that, to get into the weeds here, what that means is a $250 grant per new player that they bring in. So do the math. 25 kids, you get 25 times $250. So whether they're already charging nothing or charging $100 or whatever they're charging, this would be for every new player that they get. Okay. But then with that, how can we raise money in that community to reinvest back into statewide community hockey so that eventually, as I said when I started rambling here, that eventually we're going to pay for every kid in Minnesota to play their first year of hockey for free. And that's not going to happen next year or probably even 2 years, but we're confident that there are people out there that want to make sure that, hey, this isn't the end of hockey on the east side of Bloomington. This is the beginning of version 2 of hockey on the east side of Bloomington. I'm certain that we'll be working with the people in Bloomington to make sure that we get kids playing hockey again on the east side of Bloomington. And for every cautionary tale there is, like Bloomington and St. Paul Johnson right now, there's a lot of really good stories. For example, Laverne's in the state tournament again. Laverne didn't have hockey a generation ago. Laverne was only a wrestling and basketball town, and now Laverne is a hockey town. The captain of the Gophers men's team last year was from Laverne. Dodge County just won the girls' state championship. I believe the second leading goal scorer on the Gopher men's team is from Laverne, from Dodge County. So generally, for every kind of negative story or situation like Kennedy or Johnson, there's 2 or 3 other good stories, but that doesn't mean that it's completely healthy statewide. And so that's part of our objective. And we just believe that when you boil it down to the essence of it, just make sure that we're getting 5 and 6-year-old kids to start the game, because they'll keep playing the game. And let's go into the areas that really need more help to have the game become part of their culture or remain part of their culture. And that's what Skated Forward is hoping to accomplish.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but if our listeners want to track this, want to make a donation, want to get involved, just want to see where this is all going, is there a great website? Is it all going to be based out of the Wild's website, or is there a Skated Forward site that we can direct them to, whether it's now here already or coming down the road?
Skatedforward.org. Not .com, .org, skatedforward.org, but you can also get there from wild.com. It is part of the Minnesota Wild Foundation and the Minnesota Wild. So you'll hear and see a lot of us here over the course of this week with the boys high school tournament and all that's going around with that. But we're really communicating through our partners at Minnesota Hockey and both the Girls and Boys High School Coaches Association, and then also Miami, which is a lesser known organization, but a very important organization. They are the Ice Arena Managers Association for the entire state. So we'll have some kind of micro communication, but you'll also hear and see us, especially if you're going to be at the Boys State Tournament this week.
I vividly remember, Mike, my first Wild regular season game. I was an early season ticket holder. Before I started working the games, I was just a fan. And so I got to go to the game against the Flyers. Darby Hendrickson scored the first goal in Wild history on home ice. I remember walking to the building and seeing the high school sweaters, the college display. So from day one, you were there. I really love the way that this organization has been able to connect back with amateur hockey in the area. How did that all come together? Was that something you guys talked about day one when you first got together as the rink was being assembled? Because, again, they talked about that aspect yesterday on the nationally televised broadcast and how cool it is that Minnesota has that display. When you walk in the rink, it circles the entire balance of the building with all those sweaters.
Yeah, and that's one example of many of the Minnesota Wild supporting community hockey in the state. And I referenced Matt Maka earlier, and I would say Matt, again, many people were involved in that. I was fortunate to be an observer of all of that back then. But Matt really drove that. And then the original owner, Bob Nagley, who the state of hockey was in his core. You've probably heard the story that when they were throwing out ideas of names for the team hadn't been named yet. And one of Bob's ideas, and he was serious, was state champs. And I think some people rolled their eyes a little bit, but people understood what it meant. You know, in Minnesota, the phrase state champs is so powerful when it comes to hockey. And obviously that wasn't the one that was selected, but I think that was some strong insight into Bob's heart and what mattered to Bob. it being a Minnetonka alum and somebody that played high school hockey back in the day. But Matt Maka, I think, really saw the opportunity to see the Wild as the team that ties the state of hockey together. I mean, we all have our communities, we have our high schools, we have our colleges. So we're not fully united when it comes to who we cheer for up until we get to the Wild, and then we're fully united at that point. So I think Matt really just saw the opportunity to celebrate and shine as much as we're going to shine a light on. You come to a Wild game and you might hear the score of the Flyers Islanders game. You might also hear the score of the Grand Rapids Greenway game, and how meaningful that is to our fans. And then they've just been true to it since day one. And I would say the creation of Skated Forward is just the next example of that. It's not like this is the first time the Wild have said, hey, let's get out there and actively support community hockey. I would suggest they do it more than any NHL team, and now we're going to do even more of that. But the one story I'll share is that when the Wild started, it was the Detroit Red Wings were at the top of their game. Yep. And I think Detroit being known as Hockey Town, because the Red Wings did a good job of giving themselves that name and marketing it really well. They put it in the ice and they did a great job with it. So there was this notion that Detroit was Hockey Town, and you can probably imagine that people here felt like, I think we're Hockey Town, especially people from War Road, really felt like offended by it. So we wanted to capture that feeling, but also felt like really this is more than a town. This is a collection of towns, and a collection of towns from Halleck to La Crescent, from border to border. And we had a number of different options that were written on the whiteboard, but State of Hockey seemed to feel like that just rolled off the tongue the best. And that was introduced. And as again, back to Matt Maka, as Matt Maka will say, the Minnesota Wild didn't create the State of Hockey. They just gave it a name. It was there all along. All these aspects about hockey in Minnesota that you think about. And then what is it? It all just kind of lives under State of Hockey. And now 25 years after that phrase was introduced, you just hear that phrase so frequently. It's such a part of our dialect here in Minnesota. And just pay attention. Just this week, you'll hear a kid being interviewed after he scores. You're going to interview a kid after he scores the game-winning goal, and he just will mention like, oh, how cool it is. What a memory here growing up in the State of Hockey, and now I just scored an overtime goal. It just is it's just said without even thought now. It's just so real. And that captures what the Wild were looking to do when they started, was not just be the NHL team in Minnesota, but essentially be the team that unites all of State of Hockey. You can go and you can cheer for Roseau or War Road, or you can cheer for Blaine or Centennial, but when you come down here to St. Paul, we all cheer for the Wild and we celebrate the game at every level in our state. So you're right. I think of that game, that first game, a lot. That was kind of you look back, it was only 7 years between the North Stars last game and the Wild's first game, but it felt like it was 27 years. But that was a pretty special evening that I have a lot of vivid memories of, just like you.
Yeah, it was a wonderful night, and none of us really had any idea what to expect. And I think as the momentum built around those early years, the crescendo for me was still the most famous goal in Wild history. And I always talk about the significance of Andrew Burnett's overtime winner in Denver against the Avalanche. Not only did you have a group of Hall of Famers on that team for Colorado, including the goaltender Patrick Waugh, but it to me signaled the passing of the torch. That first home game was a step. Those first couple years were a big step. But I think for a lot of us that grew up with the North Stars and specifically lived through the 81 and 91 Stanley Cup runs, when that happened and Burnett scored that goal, this town had that fever pitch that I remember so well with both those Stanley Cup runs, where everybody is talking about the hockey team. That happened again when Burnett did that in 2003. And I think that will happen again when this team and this core eventually gets on a cup run, because there is nothing like the cadence of the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Yeah, you think about that year and how special it was, and they only went halfway. I mean, what if they went? How fun it is if you win a Stanley Cup, you get double what happened that year. And something that when I think back to how fun that was, and you're right, that was one of those deals where just the entire state was caught up in the euphoria of what was happening here in St. Paul the night before. And how often do you see back-to-back home and road games in the
Never.
Stanley Cup playoffs?
It's
But
crazy.
the night before, Richard Park scored that goal, and because that happened here in St. Paul, I remember that feeling when, if you recall that game, the Wild were up 2-0. And Colorado scored 2 goals in the third period. And clearly they had a better roster. So you're thinking to yourself, well, that's it. You know, this was a nice run for a team in its third year of existence, but it's over. And then Richard Park scores that goal. I recall that feeling of just because you're there, and that happened here in Minnesota. And then what gets forgotten a lot is that Game 7 was the next day, the very next day, and then to have back-to-back nights like that, you're exactly right. And then one of the things I always think about with playoff hockey and why it's so much fun is the weather's getting nicer, so people are going to games in shorts, you know, and people are watching games outside and at viewing parties and things like that. And I'm right there with you. I think if we can ever have that run, that surprisingly just the odds say we should have had that run at some point between the North Stars and then the first 25 years of the Wild. But if we can have it, and you alluded to it, I'm not on the hockey side of things, so I shouldn't be commenting on the team, but we got a great team already on the ice. Most people think we have one of the best groups of prospects of any NHL team, and then clearly we're going to have some money to spend if the right players out there. So the ingredients are there for this to be a pretty fun next several years of Wild hockey.
So I asked Matt Maka the same question when he was on this show a couple months ago, and if you can kind of close your eyes and put yourself in this spot. So we have the run. It's not just half; it's all the way. The team finishes the deal in the next few years. We see the Stanley Cup for the first time. We get to the parade. It's in St. Paul. Where do you want the parade to finish? And where do you want to be? And who do you want to be with? And I would assume Matt would be one of the guys you'd want to be with when the parade comes to an end, and then the guys are going to get up there. They're going to give their speeches, and we're going to all be kind of celebrating together. I can see it happening, and it gives me goosebumps to just verbalize it. But how do you want that to play out?
Can I give you a different kind of answer, I guess?
Sure.
All right. How I want that to play out is we've never had it in Minnesota. We've maybe came close in 91, 81, a little bit. But we've never had that. And hockey, getting back to, there's a lot of hurdles to get your kid to play hockey. Hockey needs more external reasons to motivate what I would call fence-sitting parents to sign their 5-year-old up for hockey. Okay. Huh. If both parents played hockey and love hockey, they're going to sign their kid up for hockey. But if both parents didn't, there needs to be some external reason why they're going to sign their kid up for hockey. Otherwise, they're going to sign their kid up for the default sports like basketball and soccer. Okay. If we can ever get a Stanley Cup championship here, and what goes along with that, which means 2.5 months of unbelievable evenings in the spring and early summer, memorable overtime goals, different heroes every night. Just that run in the spring, how many 5 and 6-year-old girls and boys are going to tell their mom and dad, I think I'd rather have skates than tennis shoes. Okay. And so what I want to see, so when you ask that question about the parade, where I want it to end, I want it to end that following October with the best season of registrations of new hockey players that we've ever had. Okay. So, I'm going to enjoy the party as well. And I can't wait for those games to happen. But the real impact I want to see are the next several years of just even more kids in Minnesota playing hockey.
I love the way you see it. I love that vision. And I think we got just a little taste of it here a couple of weeks ago with the Four Nations face-off, because as you know, Mike, with the Big Four, with the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, and hockey, we're always the fourth one. But for a 2-week period there, while football was over and basketball was doing some weird slam dunk contest, jumping over cars, hockey took center stage. So when you turned on SportsCenter, when you turned on whatever sports outlet you wanted, when you turned on talk radio, all they were talking about was hockey in the Four Nations. And I was asked about that experience, watching it, seeing the Wild players in the tournament, and my immediate answer was, this will help grow the game because there are kids somewhere watching this that want to be a part of it. So I love that your answer circled back to growing the game, because I looked at the Four Nations face-off is not only awesome for the league, but great for the game of hockey.
Yeah, and a different way to give a Minnesota spin to what you just said is the Four Nations. You know, I guess hopefully something like that happens every year, whether it's the Four Nations, the Olympics, or the World Cup, because that is very inspiring, and there's nothing like playing for your country. And of course, winning a Stanley Cup or having a deep playoff run, but sometimes you're not going to make the playoffs, so you can't rely on that, right? But having in Minnesota, having things like the state tournaments, even the youth tournaments, having something more to inspire families to get their 5 and 6 year olds to play the game, and to inspire the 5 and 6 year olds that are playing the game to keep playing the game. And there was a photo that a friend of mine who lives in Stillwater, and her son is a mite in Stillwater, and her son's team had either a practice or a game on this past Friday evening. And she knows, she feels the same way I do. We talk about growing the sport and how important it is to go out and invite new families into the game. And she sent me texted a photo to me on Friday night that she took of her kid and her kid's teammates stayed on the ice in Stillwater after their practice was over. And they have a big screen there at the rink they were at. And they put up the high school game. And the Stillwater team at that time, they were in overtime playing Hill Murray in the section final. And it was just such a great visual that it doesn't have to be always Brock Faber and Kirill Kaprizov and the Wild, or something as wonderful as a U.S.-Canada game in the Four Nations. It can just be the bigger kids in your neighborhood playing, the evil team that is your rival, whoever that might be. Okay. And so here was this great photo of these 5 and 6 year olds watching 17-year-olds that live on the same cul-de-sac they do, but being incredibly inspired by that. And I thought to myself, like, when the current crop of Stillwater high school players were mites, so when they were in those skates, Noah Cates was scoring his amazing spinorama overtime goal for Stillwater to beat Hill Murray back in 2016. So it's just this inspiration that also occurs at the local level that is something very unique and special to Minnesota that the rest of the country doesn't have, because they don't deliver their hockey to kids in the same way that we get to experience it here in Minnesota. So that inspirational piece, like you just talked about, the importance of Four Nations, the importance of having that attention on our sport, is very meaningful and right on. But when you think about it, in Minnesota, we have so many more opportunities like that to inspire these 5 and 6 year olds, and to inspire parents of 5 or 6 year olds to say, hey, that looks pretty cool. I think we're going to sign our kids up for that.
I did see that picture on X or Twitter and whatever. It was really, really cool. And I love that they put the game up, and they probably had the volume going. And then to see, I'm sure those kids got to see the game-winning goal. And the celebrations to me with those section finals, especially when it ends in dramatic fashion in overtime, where the kids immediately go skate to the student section and they all celebrate together. It is unlike anything else. It's a spectacle all to itself. And I love that those little kids got to see that, and now they can dream big and think about their high school days down the road. Mike, we've come to the final segment on our conversation. It's the Hat Trick Hot Seat. 3 quick questions for you, no wrong answers. And I'm going to start with this one, because you mentioned Duluth, where you kind of had your roots in the game of hockey kind of start growing. Who was the first hockey hero you remember having? I'll give you my quick story. My dad took me to a North Stars Golden Seals game back in the 70s.
Wow.
Jules Malash was the goalie. Yeah. I was sitting right behind the net, and it was really cool because Malash would end up coming to Minnesota later after they merged with the Cleveland Barons. But I was obsessed with the goalie and the equipment and the mask. So Jules Malash was my first hockey hero. He's still my all-time favorite player. Who was your early on hockey hero? It doesn't have to be an NHL player, obviously, because you're in Duluth. But as a little kid, who did you look up to?
I'm going to give you 2 answers, if that's all right. One
Sure.
is absolutely Kurt Giles.
Nice.
He was just a phenomenal player for UMD. He started at UMD when he was 16. He was 16 years old.
God, that's crazy.
Yeah, and he was unbelievable, and the Bulldogs had a great team there in the late '70s. Mark Pavlich and John Harrington, but Kurt Giles was my guy, and then he just happened to go on to the North Stars and have a great career with the North Stars. So I always loved watching Kurt Giles. But one thing that made an impact on me on my first ever plane flight, my parents were taking us to Disney World, and we're getting on the plane, and then I just kind of like my eyes got huge, and Al McAdam was taking his family to Disney World. And so I told my mom, I said, that's Al McAdam. And then not knowing this, but my mom coordinated with the flight attendant. And then all of a sudden the flight attendant, while we're in flight, said, hey, is your name Mike? Yeah, this guy wants to talk to you. So I went and sat. Al McAdam had me come back and sit with him for about 20 minutes. And he couldn't have been nicer. I was probably in 5th grade. At that age when you're old enough to get it, but young enough to just have stars in your eyes. And just the fact that he took that amount of time out to ask me a bunch of questions that he probably wasn't that interested in, but like what school I went to and all this stuff. And if you remember, it was Payne, McAdam, and Smith, and they were like a line. It felt like they were a line for a decade. But just him taking the time to spend that time with me just made me a fan of Al McAdam for life.
I remember the goal he scored, Mike, not the year they went to the Cup, but the year prior to that. They were taking on the Montreal Canadiens, who were the New York Yankees, who had won all these Stanley Cups with Guy Lafleur and Larry Robinson and Jacques Lemaire. In Game 7 in the Forum in Montreal, Gilles Malache in goal, Al McAdam, net front presence, tipping one in. I want to say Bobby Smith is the guy that threw the puck from the goal line extended into the slot, and he was there to tip that puck in. Just a clutch player, just an amazing goal scorer for the North Stars. What a cool story that you got to sit in an airplane. What a great week that had to be for you.
The negative to it, though,
Mike
was
Snee.
The vacation peaked on the flight on the way down. Meeting Mickey Mouse didn't hold a candle to meeting Al McAdam. So,
all right,
not to be a
next
pessimist.
question is, no, that's okay. I get it. I'm a hockey guy. Much prefer Al McAdam over Mickey myself. Dinner spot in town, whether it's Minneapolis, St. Paul, or maybe it's back in Duluth, if you want to go that route. But your very favorite dinner spot. So you mentioned your February birthday. All the cool kids have birthdays in February. Where would you want to go?
Great question. I'm a pizza guy. I've been going to a place called Leaning Tower of Pizza on Lyndale and 25th for about 35 years.
Yes.
And I love that place. I'm trying to think of something new. You ever heard of Fat Lorenzo's Pizza?
Oh, heck yeah.
By the 5-8 Club. So
It's
we
phenomenal.
get takeout from there a lot. That's really good. Just had a rectangle pizza this weekend. I like that. That's good. I'm probably just going to stick with Leaning Tower of Pizza. I play hockey. I've been playing hockey every Monday night at Parade Ice Garden for 31 years. Gorg, you're welcome to come if you ever want to come. And I'm getting older now, so we don't do it quite as much, but Leaning Tower of Pizza is open till 2. So, we would not that we would stay till 2, but when hockey would end at 10 p.m., we would know that would be open. So back in our younger days, we'd go there and solve some problems after hockey. But I'm going to stick with Leaning Tower of Pizza.
I love it. I got to try that one. I've not tried Leaning Tower. I've heard of it. And Parade Ice Garden is one of my favorite barns. Okay, final question, and we're roughly the same age as you mentioned. So I'm super intrigued by this one. I asked this one to almost every one of my guests. I want to know your first concert. I want to know the venue, Mike, and I want to know the band or whoever the performer was.
My first concert was the Tri-State Fair in Superior, Wisconsin in the summer of 1985. And it was Cheap Trick.
Oh, I Want You to Want Me, one of their all-time classic hits. I'm sure that was the big one back then. And outdoor concert?
Outdoor concert, summer of 85. It was one of those deals. It was also like it doubled as a racetrack. It was called the Tri-State Fair in Superior, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And Cheap Trick was coming, so a group of us said we got to go check out Cheap Trick. So, and then that just kind of from there, like in the next couple of years, went to David Lee Roth, went to Bon Jovi, Def Leppard, and we just and ever since just love seeing music. But Cheap Trick. Great
answer. Well, I want to congratulate you on Skate It Forward. Really excited about this. We're going to promote it as much as we can on our show here, and I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of go down memory lane and tell some great stories. You've been an intricate part not only hockey and success with the Minnesota Wild, but college hockey, of course, a big part of that time when you stepped away from the Wild. So your passion and my passion are tied together, and I really have great respect for the work you've done and looking forward to see where this goes.
Thanks a lot for the time, Gorg. I appreciate it and appreciate all that you do for hockey here in Minnesota.
That's Mike Snee, guys. SkateItForward.org, your place to stay in tune with that, and it's a great cause to support. We are going to be back in just a quick moment to put another wrap on the show, Wooden Sticks, here on the Talk North Podcast Network. All right, we're back to close the show, and thoroughly enjoyed that conversation with Mike Snee from the Minnesota Wild, and hopefully this will take off like wildfire, because it's all boats rise, man. We got to get programs like Richfield, Kennedy, and Burnsville back on their feet. And, it's the early days right now of this initiative, but imagine where this thing can go. And, we all win. If we bring more people to hockey and there's a bigger talent pool, the game gets better. And there's, as good as it is, and looking at the state tournament and looking at the fever pitch that we saw last week with all the section finals, the game's in a great place right now, but there's another level it can get to. And I think Skate It Forward can be a huge part of that. So super excited to see where that goes, and really looking forward this year for the first time to be a part of the state tournament on the broadcast side. After 60 years, the great Lou Nanny, the guy we talked about in the open, our first guest on the show, is stepping away from the mic. The irony is he's on the road this week for our Wild broadcasts in Seattle, in Vancouver. And so Louis has passed the torch, and no one person can fill his shoes. So there's going to be a myriad of people that shuffle through the booth at the state tournament. I am lucky enough to be one of those. I think Ben Clymer, Mark Parrish, the other two. And so I'll be working both Class A and AA, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I think I've got 10 games that I'm assigned to, half of which I'll be at the desk for intermissions, pre and post game stuff. And then half I'll be in the booth, and I'm just thrilled. It's 40 years since I had a chance to play in this tournament as the goalie for Burnsville, playing under Tom Osiki. And my closest friend from that hockey team, and still my closest friend in life, Mike Luckcraft, is the head coach at Northfield. So it'll be really cool to see his team participate on the Class A side. It's going to be a magical week. It always is. I hope that you can get over there to the tournament, take it all in. It's still got that it factor. It's still, I think, one of the most special weeks on the calendar each and every year. And, when I was a kid growing up, my dad made a deal with me, and I think I've talked about this on our show before, that if my grades were okay and I wasn't getting in a lot of trouble at school, that on that Thursday he'd pick me up and get me out of school. We'd go over to watch the daytime session, have dinner in between with some of my dad's golf pro buddies, and then stay for the night session. This started when I was in first grade all the way through junior high. And, birthdays were great. Christmas was always Christmas. But for me on the calendar, it was always about the state tournament. It was the week, and it was the day I looked forward to the very, very most, to take in 4 games, to take in the pomp and circumstance and do it with my dad. It was incredible. And whenever I get to this time of year, I think back to those days as a kid, and I still get just as excited now as an adult. I cannot wait to be a part of it this year and be on that broadcast team. So I'm really looking forward to that. And hopefully we get a great tournament. We've got the right teams assembled. We've got some really intriguing matchups, and it's going to be spectacuar. The last thing I want to mention today on the show is for you guys to circle the date on your calendar. Our second wild related, but live show for Wooden Sticks is going to be on Thursday night, March the 20th at 7:00 over at Insight Brewing. And we just had our first one there a couple of weeks ago with Alex Stalock, and it is a spectacular place. And now that the weather's getting warmer, they've got those garage door setups where if it's 50, 60, 70 degrees here in the mid to late portion of March, we're going to have some open air. Got the tap room going. We got some beer specials. Michael Russo is going to be our guest. So we're really going to dive into where the Wild are, what the playoff picture is looking like, and get some of Mike's incredible insight on this team and what Bill Guerin's trying to do, and maybe where Mike thinks this whole thing is going. So it'll be a Wild-centric show. It will be a live performance of Wooden Sticks Thursday night, March the 20th, 7:00 over at Insight Brewing. My good friends Eric and Joey over there are going to take great care of you. There'll be some wonderful specials. Please join us. We'd love you to be a part of the show. And as always, thank you for taking the time to listen. And if you've got anybody you know in your friend and family circle, don't forget about the white dog, Andrew Height. You can have your friends or family member email him, aheydt@talknorth.com. Be a partner of the show and be a part of the fun. We'll see you next week and hopefully on March the 20th for that live show over at Inside Brewing. I'm Kevin Gorg. Thanks again for listening to Wooden Sticks.